Welcome to our webinar for CALPADS Perkins Data System Transition. This is Carolyn Zachary. I'm the administrator for the Career Technical Education Administrative Management Office. Can other folks in our room introduce themselves?
I'm Paula Mishima. I'm with the Education Data Management Division.
And I'm typing away the answers to your questions in the question panel.
So if you have a question, please go to the All Attendees section. That way Jeff will be able to answer your question and everyone will be able to see it. So we started with a little bit of humor. Get it to the end. Okay. There, okay, page down. So this is all about how we're going to transition from our data system to CALPADS and kind of moving into that. And so we thought we would start giving you a little bit of something to think about, and that is, you know, this whole use of data and how we're going to use the data as we move forward. I'll see you later in the presentation. The use of the data will stay the same as long as we're continuing with Perkins 4. So continue to use the data in the way for our federal reporting and for your core indicators. But then the opportunity for rich data will allow us to then look at teachers who are teaching your CTE courses. It'll give us some ideas of data high school and by district. And so we'll have richer data to then really be able to look at programs and see how we can provide assistance. So I'm going to turn this over to Paula, who's to lead us through the agenda and start us out with the why.
Okay, as you can see, the agenda is pretty straightforward. Why are we doing this? What, how, and who? So I'm going to start with a little bit of the why. And this is mostly for, I mean, most of the CALPADS folks maybe have a little of this history, but we really wanted to give you a sense as to why we are making you go through this transition.
I'll do it for you.
So the why. So I'm going to talk a little bit about of history, really, as to the problem we had, the vision we had for addressing that problem and the solution. So before 2009, really, we didn't have a data system. What we did have were numerous disparate aggregate data collections. At the time, there were 125, and they were growing. As every time the legislature created some new program, there was some new data collection. This resulted in is all of you, all the school districts, reporting data to us, to different places in the department in a variety of ways. For example, you might not know this, but we actually collected gender 20 different ways in the department, which probably drove you all crazy as you had to submit the same data to us, really, but in different ways. Anytime there was a change in state or federal reporting requirements, with data, we could not adjust to that. What we would have to do is turn around and ask LEAs again to submit us the same data, but in a different way. We also know the data was of poor quality. When we received an aggregate count, we really didn't know what was included in that. Obviously, there was no longitudinal capacity, and therefore we have little data that was useful to inform any kind of policy making. And presumably, we wasted a lot of resources both at the local and state levels reporting and collecting all of this data. Can I do it? So the vision was to address this problem by creating a data system based on student-level data. If we did this, it would allow data submissions to be more centralized, increase the consistency and integrity of the data. We knew that if we collected at the student level, if there was a change in federal reporting requirements that just required us to combine the data in a different way, we could do so without turning around and asking LEAs to submit to us yet a different version of the same data. We would be able to maintain that data longitudinally, and particularly we will devote a little bit less resources to data collection and submission. And I'll talk a little bit about whether that ended up being true or not. So the system would provide districts, you all, some immediate access to basic information as students transferred to your schools. You wouldn't have to wait for the CUME file. We're hoping to provide you an ability to update the system kind of on an ongoing basis, so you didn't have to kind of wait for certain times of the year to do your data submissions. You also have access to longitudinal data on students. You would use the number of aggregate reports that you sent up to us, and potentially there might be some cost savings. The system would provide the state much rich data, quality data for accountability research, program evaluation, resource allocation determinations. We would have the ability to provide new statewide reports and respond to requests from for other reports, as well as a streamlined data collection system that could meet state federal requirements as they continue to change. So the source CALPADS, the question is CALPADS doing what was envisioned? For the case, you all could answer this better than I, but as here is that in terms of immediately providing access to basic information, we find that LEAs are using CALPADS in that way. The new kid comes, you might look up to see what their English language acquisition status is, to see whether or not they need to be tested at all. When kids don't show up, rather than immediately spend time looking for the student, then you'll go into CALPADS to see whether or not they actually transfer to another school district. And if that's the case, and you don't have to invest your dropout recovery resources on looking for that student, are now telling you who your foster students are so that you can better serve them, and also providing you which students can receive free lunches without having to go through the application process. Ability to update data on an ongoing basis. I would say your workflow is probably evened out, but I'm not sure if it's got less. For sure, you can kind of interact with CALPADS on an ongoing basis. You have national data for students that come to you. You can see a student's enrollment history, for example, what program they've been involved in or participated in. And we have reduced aggregate reporting. We have discontinued the SIF and PACE portions of CBES. We've discontinued the LSEN and the SNOR. And we've actually avoided a number of new collections. You no longer have to submit a lot of data on your statewide assessments as part of the pre-ID. And my long-winded response to why you're here is because we are now transitioning another collection into CALPADS, which is Perkins. We're starting to also transition case dismiss. Basic transitioning Perkins to CALPADS has always been the vision to do. It's just we're now at a point where we can do so. I did talk a little bit about potential cost savings because the Department of Finance in particular thought there would be lots of cost savings when we move to CALPADS. But I think the lesson learned is there's necessarily a cost to savings cost, and this is not a bad thing, because bottom line, there's just a cost to data. We know that the data is used more by LEAs to help them make decisions, so that's a good thing. And also know that staff who spent time as aggregate reports are still very much needed because they're the SMEs or the subject matter experts in the data. And so really what happens is their work transitions from one maybe submitting data to one as being an expert on that data and working with the CALPADS person to submit that data. So we're just strongly provide this advice, which is to avoid the pitfall of simply turning the work over to your CALPADS staff. Really, CTE staff need to work with the CALPADS staff on submitting that data. Whether or not the solution has met the needs of the state, it has really provided the state with a lot more rich data to use for a number of purposes. We now are able to calculate the four-year graduation cohort rate, which we had not been able to do before. We've started to put together the long-term English learner report, which we'll start doing annually. And there's now a potential to really track outcomes. For example, for CTE completers into college and career. This is something obviously we have not started to do, but there's a potential to move in this direction, and we've already had a few conversations about that. We now do have a capacity to produce statewide reports and respond to requests for other reports. One example is the new discipline reports that you will find on DataQuest. We've had those now for a couple years, and it has actually resulted in some policy changes at the state level, so that's a good thing. We were able to provide the data for the new local control funding formula without asking you all to submit yet more data to us. As for you guys, you no longer have to submit these aggregate reports. We no longer have to collect them. So we are both experiencing that same benefit. Okay, so this will be a little bit of a review, perhaps, for the CALPADS folks who are out there, and it's really targeted for the CTE folks who might not be as familiar with CALPADS. But throughout the presentation, there were a number of documents that we're going to be referring to often, and I just wanted to tell you about what those were and tell you where you can find them, so that we don't have to kind of repeat it throughout the presentation. But the documents are available from the CALPADS webpage. The link is provided there on the PowerPoint with the as to how to get there. But on the CALPADS page, there is a systems documentation link, and if you go to that link, you'll find a number of documents. The first is the CALPADS file specs, or the CFS. This document includes all the standard files that your school districts currently submit to CALPADS, and for each file, all the data elements, and most importantly for you all, for the program staff, are the definitions of those data elements. So this is where you'll find all the data elements and definitions that are being submitted to CALPADS. Then the important document is the CALPADS code set. So a lot of the data elements, you submit the response using a code, and the codes are defined in the CALPADS code set. And the most important chunk of information in there are the state course codes. You'll find every single state course code in the code set with a definition. The definitions are all based on the CTE standards for the CTE courses. And so this is a really important document for the program staff, the CTE staff, because we'll be mapping, you currently map your local courses into the state course codes, and it's really important that your local courses meet the definitions of the state course codes. You'll see in the CALPADS code set all the CTE the codes for the CTE pathways. That's an important piece for program staff. CALPADS valid code combinations. This document is basically a big Excel spreadsheet with a bunch of tabs on the bottom. If you go to the tab called the Course Group Master Combo, there's a wealth of information about each of the state course codes. For example, it will say for a particular course, for a particular CTE course, whether or not that course is a traditional course for males or females. It'll tell you whether or not the course is a capstone course for a CTE pathway. So the program staff will find a lot of very good information in that particular tab. The CALPADS error list, this is mostly for the CALPADS folks, but it basically lists all the different rules that the data that is submitted must meet, and if a rule is not met, it'll throw an error. And finally, the CALPADS data guide. This document was actually created mostly for program staff, and it's designed in such a way that you can just kind of Xerox certain pages. The C pages are 183 to 190, and it kind of mimics. It says a lot of what this presentation will say. It talks about how the CTE data is submitted to CALPADS and how it is used. So that's another useful resource. Move to the what, and Carolyn will take over here for a bit.
Okay, so we're going to talk about kind of a definition of what CTE is, CTE course is, what a CTE pathway is, a capstone course, and then again where you can find more information. But before we get to that, I wanted to make sure that if we had any particular questions that we needed to answer out loud. Nope. Okay. So any reoccurring questions? Some of you are asking questions that you're seeing ahead, and we'll begin to those pretty soon. So the Perkins 4, which is a federal legislation that provides supplemental support to California for career technical education, gives the definition of CTE. And that is a sequence of courses that provide individuals with a coherent and rigorous content aligned with challenging academic standards and relevant technical knowledge and skills to prepare them for further education and careers in current or emerging professions. That's one of the key pieces is important for that, and we're going to go on. And it also provides students with a technical skill proficiency that helps students to achieve and earn industry-recognized credentials, certifications, or move on and get an associate's degree. It provides students with some academic knowledge, and with our CTE standards, the California state standards are aligned to the CTE standards, and so students are receiving academic knowledge if the teacher is teaching using those CTE standards. Higher order thinking skills, work attitudes, and general employability, those are our standards for career-ready practice, with main focus on helping students to really gain those, what used to be called the skills, as well as technical skills, occupational specific skills, and really knowledge of all aspects of an industry, so that it's not just focused on one part of all aspects of an industry. So this part is one that we talk about what CTE is. At the local level, you have your CTE courses, and you can call your courses whatever you would like at the local level. For this example, I'm going to talk about automotive, transportation industry sector. So you have an auto class. You're going to call it Auto 1. We map that course to a state course code, and we'll refer to what the state, where you can find information on the state course codes. CE state course codes are numbered 4,000 to 5,999. Someone has to map their local courses. One district might call it Auto 1. Someone else might call it certain repair, beginning, or whatever. It doesn't matter. They all have to be mapped to a state course code. In those state course codes, you also have to map them to a pathway. We have 58 identified pathways. In California, you can add any. That's all. 58. So you have to pick which pathway your courses are going to fit into, map it to that, and then here at the department, we map those pathways into the 15 industry sectors that we have in California, and then we further map those in federal career clusters, which are slightly different than our industry sectors. So the important piece for all of this, and that drive all of the data as we move forward, is that state course code. Piece is critical. So in order to call a CTE course, what are the requirements? First of all, the teacher has to be appropriately credentialed to teach that course. You need to have a minimum of 150 hours or 1 year of instruction. Districts that run a 4x4 block, you have fewer often than 150 hours, but you are meeting that 1 year of instruction component. And you need to make sure that you're identifying it with the CALPADS, the CBED code of 4,000 to 5,999. You also need to ensure that, as I said, that your courses are mapped. This goes back to what Paula had said earlier about the Perkins folks need talking to the CALPADS staff. That it's not a responsibility of the CALPADS staff to try and figure out what a locally titled course is, how it maps to a CBED code. That's really the responsibility of program staff, and that's why we asked for this training to encompass both CALPADS folks and Perkins folks, so that you can work together to ensure that you are mapping your local courses to CBED codes that are accurate. What you'll see is that we have courses that will be identified as non-traditional CTE courses. And some of those courses are traditionally by one gender. So, for example, welding tend to have more male students enrolled in welding. We have more females enrolled in some of our education pathways, child development pathways, and those are considered non-traditional. We take this up. This determine which occupations are considered non-traditional, and have a course group master code tab that will allow you to see which courses are non-traditional for either male or female. And you don't have to do anything. Again, if you've mapped it to the right course between 4,000 and 5,999, that course group master combo will automatically identify a course as non-traditional. So you have all of your local courses, and courses need to fit into a sequence. The sequence needs to be in one of those 50 approved pathways, and those pathways, if you aren't familiar with them, can be found in the CALPADS code set, could be found on the CDE website. So a sequence of courses need to be no less than 2 full-year CTE courses with a combined duration of less than 300 hours, or for who have an ROP program where you're running a multi-hour course that provides sequential units of instruction and has a duration of not less than 300 hours. That can also be considered a pathway. The pathway needs to be coherent. It needs to include courses with objectives and content that are clear and have a direct relationship to the occupation or career that are targeted by the program. It needs to include introductory and concentration CTE courses so that students are mastering the skills and knowledge that they need for employment and post-secondary education and training. So, example of a CTE pathway, this is in the ICT industry sector, and this is in software and systems development. This is a 3-course sequence. So we're out with exploring computer science. So you'll see that in software and systems development, you'll see that this is CTE pathway 174. And then see that we have 3 courses, and in parentheses after each one, you'll see a CBED code. Again, you'll notice that those are in the 4,000s. Notice that there's an asterisk by all of those because those are all considered non-traditional for women. So a lot of careers in IT are non-traditional for women. This is an example of a pathway, which is a coherent sequence of courses. And capstone course. So your capstone course is the last course in your planned sequence of courses and is necessary for employment in an identified occupation. And gives you some information on where you can find additional information that I covered. So document to have if you've been able to print out the PowerPoint, or we'll be able to print it out later. This is a good resource for you to have, to use. I'll go over it because it's a lot of the things that Paula went over. This is of what the CalPADS valid code combinations and course group master combo will look like. So far left, you'll see that there's the course group state code, then the course group state name. So again, that's the name that is to that CBED code, which is also called the course group state code. So that matches that. You might call this, again, as I said, something different at your local level, and that's fine, but mapping it to this section. And you'll see that there's a column that shows you whether it's non-traditional for males or females. In this case, it's females. And then then it tells you whether the course is a capstone course. So also mapping, when you're mapping your course, you're identifying your capstone course based on the CBED code. So again, you won't have to tell us if it's a capstone course or not. The CBED code will determine and will help us to know that that's your capstone course. this is where you can find more information on our CTE standards for all industry sectors. They're located on our on the CDE website under the CTE MC standards. They're all there by industry sector. So now this goes to Paul on how we're going to do some of this.
Okay, so this is more geared towards for the CTE folks on the call. I'm just going to give a little background for how CALPADS works. It'll make everything else make more sense. So CALPADS 101, and then we'll talk a little bit about how CALPADS collects CT data, and then how that CALPADS data is used for Perkins reporting. In terms of CALPADS 101, as I said before, CALPADS is a longitudinal data system. All data is connected by a non-personally identifiable identifiers. One is the statewide student identifier, and the other is by the statewide educator identifier. And as I said before, data can kind of be submitted on an ongoing basis throughout the year. Data can be submitted on an ongoing basis throughout the year. There are certain times of the year when the data in the CALPADS operational data store, or ODS, is snapshotted or taken a picture of for verification purposes. So there are two main submission periods in CALPADS. One is the fall and one is the end of the year, and they're very different. In the fall, what happens is a picture is taken of all the data as it is on Census Day, which is always the first Wednesday in October. That data is shown in certification reports. You look at those reports, and once you're happy with them, you certify the data, and at that point, it's frozen. Your certified data is frozen and becomes your official data. So in fall time, we're looking at your official enrollment counts, grads and dropouts, and so forth. The year is different. What it does is it takes a look at all data cumulatively throughout the year, and Again, it takes a picture of that, and it shows the data to you in reports, and you certify those reports. So the CTE data comes in at the end of the year in the end of year one submission, which is the student course completion data, as well as in CTE file. So in this presentation, anything in purple are kind of the CTE-related things. The data that's submitted to CALPADS comes in different files. There's student files, course files, and staff files. So the main files that relate to CTE are the student files, the one called the Student Career Tech Ed file, and the course files, the course section completion file, and the student course section completion file. So I will talk about those a little bit more in more detail. Okay, with regard, I just wanted to say though, for the student data, we get enrollment data, student information, program data, and English language acquisition data. That's the data we collect and maintain in CALPADS for all the time. And so any CTE data that we collect, we don't have to ask you again for this kind of information because it's already in CALPADS. So we do our federal and state reporting for CTE. We're able to disaggregate the data by the various subgroups that's required because we already have that data in CALPADS. So even though this isn't specifically CTE data, it's important data because it is used in the CTE reporting. Course data, there are two main files. One is the course section enrollment file and the section completion file, and the student course section files. So talking about the course section enrollment and completion files, those files, they're basically the same file. They just come in at different times of the year. The enrollment file comes in the fall as part of fall 2, and the course completion file comes in at the end of the year. File, there are a number of data elements. I've just highlighted, I've just listed the main ones on this PowerPoint slide. The purple ones are the ones that are CTE related. So I'll go into those specific data elements in a minute. On the student course section enrollment file, the course section file tells us about the courses, different information about the courses. For example, who's teaching the course, or whether or not the course is a CSU approved course. The section file doesn't have to tell us all of that because we've already learned about it in the course section file. But what the student course section file does is it tells us what student is actually enrolled in a particular instance of that course, which is the course section ID. So the way the data is tied together is the course section ID numbers. What comes in on the student course section file for completion is the number of credits earned and the final grades. Slide. So talking about the data elements that we collect on the file, the actual course code, which is the most important thing. We collect other information about the course. For example, we collect the content code. The course content code can be used for a course that is not a CTE numbered course. So this is a course that's not a 4000 to 5999 number. It's
that's the entire thing. That would be an option after gender.
No, 154. This is, you're thinking of a different one.
No, this is one where you can put a CT course. Russ has to take that out.
Okay, it hasn't gotten to that yet.
It's coming out.
Okay.
Anyway, sorry.
So the new I guess the new flash is that we're retiring this, but it hasn't been officially retired in CALPADS. You used to be able to.
Yes.
A academic course that is actually part of the pathway. So put out more information because apparently that is being changed. The CE-Tech Prep Course Indicator is another one that it's still there, but you don't have to use it because that's no longer necessary. The section instructional level code, this is for any course, not just a CTE course, and it tells us about the course as to whether or not it's at non-standard level. For example, it's a remedial course, or on the opposite end of that, it's a college credit-bearing course. We're actually clarifying the definition of this attribute by saying that if you add this attribute to a particular course, that means the student is actually getting college credit for that course. It's attempt to start collecting dual enrollment. Education program funding source code. This was for those who are in the partnership academies. We asked at some point a while ago that they wanted to be able to identify whether or not courses that were created by partnership money were continuing, and so that's what this code is for. Finally, the CTE course section provider code. This is another code that will become obsolete as the funding for CTE is flexed. But only for this year, basically, you are required to enter this code as either a district course or an ROCP funded course.
I want to give a little bit of clarification to the course instructional level code, because many of you that are recipients of the CCPT grants, one of the areas of focus was on dual enrollment. And so the CALPADS office, as Paula said, will be coming out with more clarifying information on what that means. And we're also looking at, in the future, not this year, but in the future of that CTE-Tech Prep course indicator of changing that to talk about articulated courses. So the difference being dual enrollment happens concurrently. So the students are high school credit and college credit at the same time. Where an articulated course, the students get their high school credit, and then when they move into the community college, they earn that community college credit sort of after the fact, after they've completed that course. Looking at collecting that data in that indicator, it won't be happening this year. You'll be getting notification when you will.
Okay, RCPs. As you know, we asked folks to submit to CALPADS kids take through RCPs. RCPs themselves cannot submit data directly to CALPADS, and so there's a few little nuances to how that data is submitted, and those nuances are described in the data guide on page 187, so I won't go through those details here. With regards, the file is actually fairly simple. These are the main data elements on that file. The academic year ID is the year that's being reported. So for this coming end of year submission, which will start June 1st, it would be the academic year 2014-15. The SSID of the student, the pathway code that the student is in, and if the student completed in this year, you would simply put this year. You would put the year 2014-15. The main thing to remember in this data is that by setting a pathway code, you are telling us that the student is a concentrator. If CTE pathway completion academic year ID is blank, that means the student is a concentrator. If it is filled in with the current academic year for that reporting year, then you're telling us the student is a completer. The academic year ID and the CTE pathway completion academic year ID need to be the same. If they're not, you get a fatal error. And because a student can only complete once, you have to tell us each year that the student completed. The data is longitudinal. If they happen to complete one pathway in 1 year and another year, we will have that fact in CALPADS. The main thing is the academic year ID and the CTE pathway completion academic year ID, they need to be the same. Okay, now we're turning to how does CALPADS collect CTE data. Talk about participants, concentrators, and completers.
Okay, since in CALPADS, this is your entire universe of CTE students. These are your non-concentrator participants, your concentrator participants, and your completer participants. So pretty much any student enrolled in a CBED code of 4,000 to 5,999. They're participants. It's your whole universe of career tech ed. Here's an example of some students who are participating in tech ed. This is an arts, media, and entertainment class. So what do you do to submit non-concentrator participant data to CALPADS? All you need to do is basically submit your course completion data, which you're doing for all students, not just CTE students. You don't have to do anything extra. And what CALPADS does is simply counts all the students who have completed a CTE course who are not a concentrator or completer. So the main thing that you need to be concerned about is that you have reviewed your local CTE courses to make sure that they meet the state course definition, and that the local CTE courses have been mapped accurately into the state course codes, and that you've reviewed all those course attributes I talked about earlier. So the key is really mapping your local courses to the state course codes, ensuring that your local courses meet the definitions of the state courses. That's key. And if you've done that and it's all mapped correctly, then you do anything else to report your participants, because we basically count the kids who've completed a CTE course. Okay, concentrator participants. CALPADS has the student demographic data. CALPADS will provide my office with all of the participant data we need for our federal reporting requirements, and those include race, ethnicity, gender, and parenting minors, and as well as socioeconomic status. And then you've got the pregnant and parenting minors piece. Paula is going to talk a little about that.
So, we don't actually collect in CALPADS if a student is pregnant or parenting, but what we do collect is whether or not a student is participating in a pregnant parenting program. It's our proxy for determining getting counts of students who are pregnant or parenting who are CTE. If you have a pregnant or parenting student, but you don't have a program, you can still submit this program record that will then count them as a pregnant or parenting CTE participant. Just a view of the report CALPADS that your district certify for your CTE participants. All your LEAs, in order to certify, you certify at both level 1 and level 2. And as CALPADS reports work, this is an aggregate report, and then you can drill down to the next report, which is the student list. So you can see what students make up those aggregates.
Let's talk about concentrators. So a key concentrator is a student who has completed 50% of a planned program sequence in hours or credits and is enrolled in the next course of a recognized CTE pathway. So, for example, in a 2-course sequence, only students who have completed 2 courses be reported, let me rephrase that. In a 2-course sequence, only students who have completed both courses should be reported as a concentrator and also going to be reported as a completer. In a 3-course sequence, students who have completed the 2 courses and have enrolled in the 3rd course are going to be reported as concentrators. So in a 3-course sequence, course 1, students are participants, 2 are participants, and in course 3, they're a concentrator and a completer. I talked about it before, all students in any course with a CBED code of 4,000 to 5,999 are considered a participant. All of your concentrators are also participants. Again, students, these are students that are most likely concentrators. It's a little higher level here in a fire science program. This student is likely to be in a capstone program because you won't be seeing a student that's just in an introductory program working in a hospital with this type of equipment. What do you do in CALPADS for your concentrators, Paula?
So all you need to do is basically submit that C pathway code in the student career tech ed file. Concentrator, not a completer, the academic year, completion year is null. Now, I know from going on these different road shows that there are some systems that basically derive who your colleges are based on what courses they're taking. And that works perfectly well, but to submit the data to CALPADS, they do have to basically derive by student what pathway they're in. Occurs a student who has successfully completed the capstone course in a C sequence or pathway with a grade of C or better. So you could have, when we were talking earlier about in a 2-course sequence, you have a student that is only a concentrator in the 2nd course, not a completer because they received a grade of a D or F. So then be a completer. So only your completers are those that finish all courses in your sequence and receive a grade of C or better. Just the capstone.
In capstone course. It's your local decision as to whether you move them along with lower grades than a C from in the prior courses. That when they have completed that capstone course, they are ready then to move into to exit your program, and they can go into employment or continue at a level, perhaps at a community college or some type of a secondary training in that same career path. And in CALPADS, Paula?
To be counted as a completer in CALPADS, as I already mentioned, all you need to do is have to set the CTE pathway completion academic year ID. That's That's the only thing you need to do. Year, but next year, CALPADS will also check that the completer, whoever is completed a pathway, has also completed the capstone course in the pathway. So this year we have provided in the valid code combinations which course or capstone courses in order to help get ready for next year when we actually will validate that the student completed a capstone course. We not at this time yet validate whether or not this grade received was a C or better, because grade not yet standardized in CALPADS, but it's something we're going to be looking at the data to see whether or not we can start standardizing those grades, at which point we could actually also add to this validation that the student received a C or better.
So what must be done then to submit concentrator and completer data in CALPADS?
Okay, so I know it sounds a little redundant, but actually it's actually kind of simple. As long as you submit the pathway and the academic ED completion year to CALPADS, that's pretty much all you need to do. And to that, you have to submit the Student Career Tech Ed file during the end of year 1 submission. So that's the main file for CTE that you have to submit in order to get this data in. Data is of quality. CALPADS has, as I mentioned before, some rules. We call them either input validation rules, which checks data when they're submitted initially, or certification validation rules that trigger when you're trying to certify your data. And basically, your LEA will either receive a fatal or a warning if the data doesn't quite meet these rules. So the current check has been in there and continues to be in there is checking to make sure that your the awarding year and the completion year are the same. So that's an existing rule. That's a fatal error. Data can't be certified until that's fixed. This one. The CBR that will start this year in 2014-15, this will trigger if any student with a CTE pathway has not completed at least one course, CTE course in that pathway in that year. Okay, so this year we're going to be checking basically on the quality of that CTE pathway data. The student will have to complete a CTE course in that pathway, else actually this I believe is a fatal error that will be triggered. I mentioned before, a second ago, next year we'll also be checking to make sure the completers have completed the capstone course in their pathway. Okay, to solve the CTE completer and concentrator data are displayed in report 3.14. And it basically shows an aggregate of the number of concentrators and completers by pathway. And to help validate that data, you can look at the drill down to the student level data that makes up that aggregate. So to certify, after you submit your student CTE file, is you look at these reports, and when they look right, you certify level 1 and 2.
This is an opportunity for CALPADS folks to work with their program partners to validate that these reports are accurate. So before you certify, you can look at the data and work with the program staff to see, does this make sense?
Yeah.
Do you really have this many completers?
And just another note on that, so these reports, I know in some LEAs, their business processes, they might print out these reports, show them to their program staff, and get to kind of approve that, allowing them to certify level 1 and then eventually level 2. But it's remembering that depending on your district, and the program staff might, or your school staff leave the summer. So it's important to build that into your work process flows to make sure that you share these reports and have them ready while their staff who can look at them are still there. the certification deadline is July 31st, so often by then folks left. So it'd be important if folks do leave for the summer to try to get these reports to you before they leave for the summer. There is an amendment window that follows July 31st. So there is another opportunity for folks to review the data when they come back. Really, that's a pretty busy time for CALPADS folks. So it's this is just one thing to if you do it earlier, it's better.
A couple of questions that I know Jeff is typing furiously.
Well, we got a whole bunch of questions. We can stop and I'll just pose the question.
So we're going to pose a couple questions that we've had. But Polly, one that I've seen, that is, how will transfer students' historic data be submitted for previous years to resolve fatal errors related to concentrator capstone? So moves from one district to another, and let's say they were in a culinary program in District A, and they've moved to District B. Calling Steve, who asked this question, I hope I'm giving a good example. They move from District A, they're in the culinary program, say the first level course. They move to a new district, District B. They then go into the second course, and then third course, they're concentrator capstone course. So it's going to show that they haven't.
Then right now, we just look at that year. So if they completed the capstone course, say, in the second district, that works. CALPADS isn't going to be looking back longitudinal to see whether or not they completed the courses that led up to that. Having said that, it's the kind of thing that program staff would look at from a monitoring perspective, because we do have all of the data. So it's one of those things that we have a few years of data that program staff can start to look to see whether or not those completers, whether they actually completed a sequence of courses. We do know that sometimes counselors might put kids in a CTE pathway and courses out of sequence, which is not a good thing. And if you know, our CTE program staff start seeing a lot of that, it'd be a red flag to monitor or something. So right now, it's not going to cause an error in CALPADS, but it is data that we will have to look at.
So that is data that we will be looking at, that my office will be looking at for compliance purposes, because we're going to be looking at students that are completing course sequences. And if you're at a school where traditional counselors have been able to hardworking individuals, if we have any counselors on the call, but have been able to put students in advanced courses without prerequisites, then it makes that advanced course doesn't make it advanced, because now you're expecting a student to go into an advanced auto class who hasn't had any prior auto experience. And the teachers are expecting a certain level of when the students come in there, just as a French 3 teacher would be expecting a certain level of fluency from even coming into French 3. If a student hasn't had French 1 or 2 and has had no French ever, French 3 is the only thing that fits in their schedule, and not a good place for them, because that French teacher is not going to be able to the concepts that need to be taught for the French 3 students. Now, that we have seen some schools do the advanced courses, the numbers, because we know as advanced in their courses, sometimes the numbers go down. And so we have seen what we call competition classes, and this is from my days of being an elementary school principal. We would have teachers teaching a second and third grade combination class. Now, the teacher taught second grade curriculum and the teacher taught third grade curriculum. There was an expectation that the second graders automatically got to skip second grade and move into third grade curriculum. So we've seen this, and I've seen this out in the field, where we will have, say, an auto class or a culinary class. You might have culinary 3 and 4. And the teacher's teaching different standards to each set of kids. This is very common also in foreign language classes. You often see in some of your foreign language classes, you'll see them do a combination. Again, the teacher's teaching different curriculum to those students at different levels.
Some of the questions. Okay, so let's go back up to see which ones we've covered so far. How are students tracked if they switch pathways? Did they start over as a concentrator? You just stressed this really. So from Woods, auto, I don't get going advanced auto, I start over again in auto, and that's fine to have participants in both Woods and auto, but you don't go straight into advanced auto, right?
Correct.
Or
Correct.
in the pathway.
And so if you have students that, and you know, when a student picks a pathway, they're picking it because there's an interest there. But let's say they're in a health pathway, and in their introductory classes, they're doing some job shadowing at the blood, and decides that, oh, seeing blood really isn't good for them. They get a little queasy, and they decide that the health pathway is not for them. So they, at the end of that year, they decide that next year they want to go into the culinary pathway. So back to the beginning in culinary 1. They don't get to start in culinary 2. So now a participant again in that pathway, and they start over in that pathway.
Okay, question is, if a course is over 300 hours, are you finished the course labeled as participants, concentrators, or completers?
They're going to be labeled as a completer if they've received a C or better, and they're all labeled as participants no matter what.
So finished, they are completers in that pathway. And again, back to the definition back early on, is a pathway, look at the definition of Perkins, and the CTE is a pathway aligned to the standards, in advanced technical skills, industry certification, or dual credit.
And Jeff, I wanted to add on, because I've seen several questions about Perkins and whether this only relates to Perkins or not. We're going to talk about that a little later, but the definition of curricular education and what a pathway is, what a course is, what a capstone course is, are all defined in the California State Plan for career technical education, and that's what drives career technical education for our whole state, whether it's funded with Perkins or not.
There's been several questions about K-8 districts and charter school districts, and districts saying we have teachers teaching STEM like C classes, robotics classes next year. Are those CTE courses or not?
So it depends. So if we're talking about 7th and 8th grade courses, they need to then be articulated onto a whole program that would take those students through, at school level, several courses. So be getting some introduction and foundation there. We don't typically collect 7th and 8th grade data for Perkins. However, you can use Perkins at those grade levels, but we don't collect that data, so it's not as
well, Mina, we wouldn't pull that data in we collect it in CALPADS.
We collect it in CALPADS,
but it wouldn't be used for CTE Perkins reporting.
Because we currently don't collect it in our Perkins data system, so we wouldn't be asking for that from CALPADS.
And same would go if there's a question relating to, we don't receive funds, we're at K-12. We have students in K-12 or charter schools. We don't have CTE programs. Will we do fall free? We only have 2 or 3 courses annually that even fall in the range. And see, that's the thing that's kind of contradictory. If you have C courses but no program, do they have the standards or not? There's plenty of really good elective classes out there that don't necessarily align to standards, so they shouldn't be considered CTE. And the CALPADS code says it's aligned to the standards to start with, so therefore it could be a program down the road, which then has implications like we've talked about with respect to if it becomes part of overall course or high school accountability.
Right, which we'll talk about later.
So,
yeah.
Let's see what other questions. Key course that's not part of a sequence but fills the 1 year of instruction. And this was a question that came up, and I asked the question back going, what would this be? And I'm not really sure what an example of where you have a course that isn't in a sequence fulfilling a year of instruction. Because
so if it's
like 1 year course,
1 year that's 300. If it's a 1 year course,
like a 50-hour course that's not in a sequence but fulfilling part of the sequence, I'm not really sure what the question was there.
Right. So maybe
hopefully whoever asked that can ask that again.
Right.
Although if it's a C course and it's not within a pathway, the student would still be considered a participant.
But if you're considering it a participant in a pathway, which pathway is it in?
Right, but you don't report pathways for just participants.
Yeah. You're able to see what I'm saying. I'm just trying to think of an example of where you have a course out there that's just a year-long course. You want to count it for something that wouldn't be part of something overall.
Well, a district could be using CT standards. It could be a standalone course. They'd be using CT standards. They don't have any other course sequences. And they're using CT standards at an introductory level. It would be just a participant course, not mapped necessarily to a path, because they don't map a pathway to concentrator or completer.
But it would be part of an overall program leading to something.
Perhaps, but maybe not.
Well, if you have something that leads to nothing, why do you have it? I guess that's my question. So, all right. There are other questions. I think we can go on.
Okay. So go on, and we'll get to your questions again as we continue this.
Okay, this was just a snapshot of the reporting paths that you certify for CTE concentrators and completers. The CALPADS data is used for Perkins E1. Again, this is repetitive because it is fairly simple. All data that you certified in 3.12 and 3.14 is used to meet Perkins E1 reporting. The data is rolled up. The only difference is the data is rolled up into the industry sectors and then reported in the federal career clusters. If you see how that looks, the CALPADS combo document shows you which career pathways roll up into which industry sectors. Next year, when we actually use the CALPADS data for E1 reporting officially, we will provide a certification report that better reflects the data looks like that we submit to the Fed, so we probably will show it by industry sectors, but that's to be coming. But basically, all the data you're already submitting, we might just reflect it back to you in a report that's more consistent with how the data is actually reported to the Feds. That we'll be creating a new report for you all to see. And this is a picture of the value code combo section that shows you how the CTE pathways are rolled up into industry sectors.
So I'm seeing a couple more that we might be able to answer.
Yeah, you can jump in on if you can see I'm answering a couple of them.
Okay, so we had a question about, I guess I won't type this. So we had a question about, someone says their district doesn't have defined pathways. They just report to Perkins all students who have taken courses within the course numbers. Will this present a problem? So if your district Perkins dollars, then you must have defined CTE pathways, and we would have those here with your local plan. If the question is, that a district doesn't receive Perkins, and you're just going to report your CT courses based on the CBED codes, we're going to talk about the purpose and some implications for that in a moment. So I hope that answered that question. Okay. We're going to talk about E2 and how CALPADS is going to be collecting our Perkins E2 data in a new submission that they're going to be developing for us.
Right. So not this year, but the following year. For the CALPADS folks who don't know what Perkins E2 is, basically for E2, your districts follow up with students graduated as completers. 6 months later, they survey them in some manner to determine what that student is now doing, whether or not they're working in the military, whether or not they're in post-secondary education. And that data then is reported to the federal government as part of the E2. Nothing changes necessarily with how your districts collect that data, whether it's through a survey or phone survey or however it is. But whatever data you do collect would need to be maintained or put somehow in your student information system, and then from there you would submit to CALPADS during the fall time. It's basically 6 months after the completion of your school year to CALPADS what the things would be. We're envisioning this to be something like, we know in CALPADS CALPADS, all the students who graduated in the prior year who were completers, and it could have been graduated 2 years before, or they completed 2 years before, but they just graduated. We might provide some sort of extract that includes all those students, and for any students that you received data information back, you would just submit that back to CALPADS, telling us whether or not they're in the military, employed, advanced training. None of these are not reported. You will not be dinged if you did not receive information for a student. That be the not reported. But basically what's different about this is for the first time you will be submitting to CALPADS data on students who've already exited your school. We go to the next slide. We've already been talking to your student information system vendors about this, and as with all big changes, we always discuss through the design and the requirements before we actually do any development. So in the next few months, we will be talking further with your SIS vendors just to make sure how we implement this works for them. But I envision it to be fairly simple, pretty much a file that would you would submit for your exited students as to what we're now doing.
Okay, and I know we had several questions about this, so hopefully this will clear up any questions you had about how this is going to, how we're going to solve out. So we put on your multiple school year hats for a moment. Currently, we are in the 2014-15 Perkins cohort. And we're going to be doing a parallel collection, which means that in year one, CALPADS reporting, so June through September, we're going to be reporting your 2014-15 participants, concentrators, and completers. You'll be starting that in September 2015. You'll also be submitting your 2014-15 if your Perkins district, if your district receives Perkins funds, you're reporting that by October 15, 2015 in E1 in our Perkins data system, same as you've done in the past. Circle that date on your calendar, as that will be the last time you set your E1 data in the Perkins data system. So, school year 15-16 Perkins cohort, students go through that year, and then between June and September of 2016, you're going to be reporting your participants, concentrators, and completers in CALPADS only. And same for 16-17 and every year out. Doing this years of dual collection just to ensure that everything is working correctly. So, how about E2? So for the current cohort of students, your completers that are graduates, you will report your E2 data on your students that graduate this May or June, the completers. You report on them as you have always done in the past in the Perkins data system, E2, which will be due March 15th, 2016. Remember, follow-up data for your students. For your graduates that are completers from your schools in May or June of 2016, I step back, 2016, you report their data in all three, which will have a window of December 2016 through March 15th, 2017. Very similar to our E2 window. We'll report your information there, and you will also report it by March 15th in the Perkins data system. That's the last time you report in the Perkins data system. In 16-17, you will report all of your outcome data for students only in CALPADS. So doing this transition so that we can check data. So we have been looking at data over multiple years. We really have seen a great improvement in CALPADS to the Perkins data system. And so we know that our participant numbers are getting closer as we're going along. We know that we will have some inaccuracies in this data because of the way it's collected. So CALPADS is going to collect this level on a student basis. And certainly our Perkins data system collects it on a course base. So you may have duplicated counts of students. The Fed for us to not have duplicated counts. So this will allow us to meet some requirements by the Feds to not have duplicated counts. In 13-14, to give you an example, we had 347 Perkins-funded districts. And of those, 278 of them submitted data in concentrator completed data into CALPADS. So that's great. That's a pretty good percentage, and that's much better than what we saw back in 2012, which, if I'm remembering right, was like 1. So great improvement there. However, we did have 69 districts that had no concentrators or completers in CALPADS, but yet they had that data in their Perkins data system. And so that's going to, we have some submission errors that will be shown for you. So, Paula, you want to just share about those 2 errors?
So, error will be if you're a Perkins district, meaning you're receiving Perkins funding, and you don't submit a student CT file, meaning there's no SCTE data, then you won't be able to certify end of year 1. So I guess Carolyn, I think she said, some districts last year who didn't submit any CTE data, even though they were Perkins districts, this year they will get a fatal error.
All right, so who should be doing this? So all districts that offer career tech ed courses should submit CTE data because, one, if you are receiving Perkins dollars, it's a requirement. 2, it is likely that at that point this is going to be in the new state accountability measure for the new API reconfigured, renamed is going to be. So it's going to be in the career readiness indicator. There are going to be multiple measures, multiple indicators underneath that, and pathway completion is likely to be one of those. So, Joe, of all of the districts, when we were at the data, we found that there were 50 agencies, districts that were not Perkins funded, and they did submit concentrator and completer data, and that's completely okay. So well ahead of the game in looking at readiness with their students. So, here's some questions. So should non-Perkins schools report CTE data? And as I just said, we're looking at the college and career indicator, and one component that's proposed is path completion. So it is going to be important that districts start reporting this data. So that, and it's likely that this will affect in 15-16. So good to have for you to start submitting your data this year, so that you can kind of get a baseline and get started with making sure that you have all of your courses mapped correctly. Paul, you have other things you want to add on that?
No, it's just that from a, as you know, the state board right now is wrestling with developing a new state accountability system. And one of the components they're talking about is a college and career, or CCI indicator, which will have multiple measures, one of which may be, it's not been determined for sure yet, but may be some credit for students who complete a pathway. So that means that if you're not a Perkins district, and we haven't had to deal with submitting any CTE data, it might be something you might start wanting to do if you have a CTE program. But they're probably, once they decide on the new accountability measures, they're going to roll it out over time. But the potential that any CI indicator they might start looking at in the 15-16 year, meaning this year 14-15 won't be used for accountability, but if you have a CTE program, you might as well start submitting that data to kind of get used to submitting that data, because there's a potential for it used in 15-16 as part of a new accountability system.
Mentioned that OCPs will not have to submit data differently. Can they expand on this, please?
They were submit differently. It's just the RCPs who are separate entities currently cannot submit data to CALPADS. So students who take classes at RCP, the districts that they're enrolled in are the ones that need to report that data. That's the way it's always been, so there's no change there.
Any other questions?
With respect to the windows and when everything are used, is that the one you're reporting? When things are being reported, the timeline for the end of year report, the amendment, and all that. So maybe we go back to that slide.
Yep.
People just need clarity on that for the end of year.
Yeah,
You know.
so in CALPADS, the end of year data, which we'll use for Perkins E1, the time frame for that is for year one is always. Usually, this is starting June 1st. Usually, it's kind of the middle of May, and the first certification deadline is July 31st. What it means is that generally it's more of a workload planning thing. Really, districts try to get their data certified by that initial certification deadline. For some of the other end-of-year submissions, like discipline, there's if you do that, we are able to give you a preview of your data that will be posted on DataQuest. But bottom line is that's the first deadline for certifying your data, and most districts actually make that deadline. Then what happens is there's an amendment window that follows whereby you can modify your certified data, and the amendment window stays open until, I don't remember the exact date this year, but it's the early part of September. So you have until then to certify your data. So unlike under the Perkins data reporting system, where I think their deadline is, what, October 15th?
October 15th.
Yeah, so it's all a little bit earlier in CALPADS, so that will be different. So two deadlines should be about the same, because we'll make the CALPADS certification deadline for fall 3 the same, which I believe is March 15th.
Correct.
So the deadlines there will be the same.
If we need to go back to slide 50 also.
Okay, hang on. I'll go back to slide 50 in a moment. The question was about adults, and adult programs do not use CALPADS. And, so for the moment, we're going to be using E1 and E2. I've been working with Chris Nelson, who's the administrator for Adult Ed Unit, and we're going to be working with a couple adult schools and looking at how we might be able to collect this data in some of the different accountability systems that are used for adult ed. So like TOPS Pro, and ultimately perhaps through CASAS. Because this data will be very valuable for reporting as we move forward on that. So we are working together. We've already talked. I've talked to a couple adult ed schools at our training in Poway, and so we're going to be looking at that. As a matter of fact, they had approached me and said we're thinking about this and what we might be able to do. So we are looking at that for those of you in adult schools. And I'll go back to slide 50. So the question is, So,
That involved.
yeah. So in the three-course sequence.
First two bullets people are confused with.
That was the first two?
Yeah.
So two-course sequence, a concentrator is also going to be a completer because they are through the program and they're enrolled in the second course or next course. In the course sequence, and we didn't add on to this, and somehow it got left off, is the and enrolled in the next course. So in the three-course sequence, students who have completed two courses and enrolled in that third capstone course, they'll be considered concentrators and they'll be considered completers at the same time. So really, it's 4 course sequences where you're going to show up as you're going to show concentrators. There'll be a participant in year 1, a participant in year 2, a concentrator in year 3, and a completer in year 4. Clarification there. Yeah.
Hear about if a student receives C in semester 1 final and receives a D in semester 2 final, the capstone course is a student a completer in that pathway.
Decision because to me it's not the final grade. To me, a final grade is both of those semesters put together in some way. And so if the second semester final covers the full year of content and the student gets a D, then they would not be a completer.
I want to go back to that slide 50 because I do think this is confusing, and I just wanted to explain why it's confusing and why we might sound like we're not making any sense. So the data is to be completed, not collected based on course completion. In CALPADS, we're collecting the data based on course completion. So the definition says completed half the course and enrolled in the next. For CALPADS, that doesn't kind of make sense because we're collecting course completion data. So if you apply a definition that didn't envision collecting course completion data to the fact that we're collecting course completion data, it does seem to make sense. So really what you end up with trying to apply this existing definition that's in the state plan to how we are now going to collect the data, you end up having completers who have completed essentially either courses or 3 courses. It's the same thing. So unless we decide to interpret the state plan definition a little differently, basically completers have completed either the 2 courses in a 2-course sequence or the 3 courses in a 3-course sequence. Correct?
Yep.
So let you know if there's a change in that. Otherwise, that's the only way we can fit an existing definition into that way we are now going to collect the data.
Any other that we can answer?
Not that are popping up. Most everybody, the deadline questions, hopefully that answered the questions with respect to the deadlines and when things will be transitioning, how ROPs report. ROPs won't report separately. The ROP information will be reported by district based on the CTE students who complete RP classes and belong to a district as, I don't know, belong mean they graduate from a district or enrolled in a district and took an ROP class? Right.
So all students are enrolled in a district, not in an ROP. They're taking their courses at perhaps at an ROP center, but they're still district students, and so that's where they're getting their diploma from, and so they're being reported. So that's where the ROP data is going to be reported. For ROPs, we're still going to be collecting for the time being, we'll still be collecting CD 20 and 21, but again, it's going to be up in the air as we move into this realm of no maintenance of effort.
Yeah.
So here's our contact information. If you have additional questions, feel free to If you have a question, we'll be happy to answer those. And let's see, we have one person. So Jeff, they asked for their question to be answered out loud.
Well, no, they wanted to ask the question out loud, and I said, unfortunately, we can't enable audio in these webinars.
Oh,
that
got
was
it.
what it was. That's why I said,
it.
you please call us so we can try to work this out. If it's easier to explain, because yeah, it's definitely easier to verbalize things in conversation than via text chat window.
Yes.
This is kind of one drawback of the webinar is the chat window. So sorry about that, you guys.
Right. So the final end of year deadline is September 4th, 2015, and that is correct. So the question is about, there's a question about E1 being due in June, and I think we answered that. One is, as we move to CALPADS, so this year, remember for your 2014-15 reporting, you're going to report in two different systems, reporting CALPADS, end of year one, which you certify in September, but the window opens in June, so you have a lot of time in there. And then the Perkins data system will open in July and will close October 15th. Report in both of those. So we move to only CALPADS reporting for E1, your window will be a month shorter, but it'll close a month earlier, but it will open a month earlier. So you'll go from June to September instead of July to October. I answered the question about a timeline, and I sent a link to download the PowerPoint, so you can do that. You'll have our information and you can get a hold of us. So again, we'd like to thank you very much for attending our webinar. Just remember, it's important that we have accurate and reliable data so that we report it and that it's used for your core indicators that it's accurate and reliable. So again, thank you much, and we'll continue to try and answer a couple questions as go along here, but we're going to end our audio. So if you have a question hanging out there, one of us will try and get to it in the next 10 minutes. Have a great rest of your day.